30 spokes gathered at a single wooden hub. Count them. Now notice that the part of that wheel which actually carries a cart across a country is the hole in the middle, the space where the axle isn't. Hinton translates the line like this: absence makes the cart work. That is the first thing this book asks you to see, and it is the last thing you would ever think to look at. 2,500 years ago, in a China tearing itself to pieces, someone wrote 81 short poems around that one idea, and then walked west out of history. We do not know his name. We are not sure he existed. What survives is 5,000 words, translated more often than any book on earth except the Bible. David Hinton translated them again in 2015, and his version says something the famous version does not. Start with the story, because it is the only story this book has. In the cultural legend, Lao Tzu was a keeper of the royal archives in the Chao capital, an elder contemporary of Confucius. Confucius came to consult him and left shaken. "A dragon mounting wind and cloud to soar through the heavens," he said afterward. "Such things are beyond me." And today, meeting Lao Tzu, it was like facing a dragon. Then the old man watched his civilization begin to eat itself, and he had had enough. He got on an ox and rode west, meaning to disappear into the mountains and never be heard from again. At a mountain pass, a gatekeeper stopped him, and the gatekeeper would not let him through until he wrote it down. Hold that image. We come back to it at the end. Hinton tells you that story, and then he takes it apart. In spite of his stature as a sage, he writes, nothing verifiable is known about him. The name Lao Tzu simply means old master. The man was probably assembled out of fragments gleaned from various old sage masters active between perhaps the 6th and 4th centuries before the Common Era. The book itself, Hinton says, was worn away, broken up, scattered, assembled, and reassembled. A geologic process lasting several hundred years that apparently included a number of sage editors. The sayings inside it may predate Lao Tzu by 3 centuries. So the most personal-sounding voice in Chinese literature belongs to nobody. There is no author. There is a riverbed and centuries of water. Which turns out to be very much the point of what the book is about to tell you. To understand why anyone wrote this, you have to know what was burning. For 1,000 years, the Shang dynasty had run China as a theocracy. A high god called Shang-Ti stood outside the world and guaranteed the ruling family's right to rule. Hinton points out how familiar that shape is, a monotheism in which spiritual connections locate the human in a transcendental spirit realm rather than the tangible earthly realm. Then the Chou overthrew them and had to explain why that was allowed. Their answer was the mandate of heaven, and it was genuinely new. Power now came with a condition attached: rule badly and heaven revokes you. And then, slowly, the Chou lost control of their own vassals. By 403 BCE, the country had fractured into the warring states, and it stayed at war for nearly 2 centuries. Out of that wreckage came the 100 schools, everyone with a diagnosis, everyone with a cure. Lao Tzu's diagnosis was stranger than anyone else's. Hinton names it in one word: exile. Lao Tzu's thought, he writes, is driven by a sense of exile that derives from a fundamental rupture between human being and natural process. Not exile from a country, exile from the ground. The break opened. Hinton argues, when Neolithic farmers stopped belonging to the earth and started managing it, and it widened every century after. And Lao Tzu compresses the entire fall into one image, 6 words wide. When all beneath heaven forgets way, war horses are bred among the fertility altars. The place where you ask the earth to give life is now the place where you breed the animals that take it. Before we go further, you need Hinton's own picture of what this book is talking about, because it is not an abstraction. In the realm of ancient Chinese myth, he writes, Earth's generative natural process takes the awesome form of dragon. Both feared and revered as the mysterious force of life itself, dragon animates all things in the unending cycle of life and death and rebirth. Dragon appears only to disappear again. Its scales glisten in the bark of rain-swept pines, and it roams seething waters. That is not decoration. That is the subject, When this book says way, it is not pointing at a doctrine or a serene feeling. It is pointing at the thing that is doing all of this right now, growing the pine and rotting it, and doing it with equal appetite. Taoism, in Hinton's reading, is simply learning to live inside dragon's weather. And Hinton pushes the lineage back further than most translators dare. He traces this cosmology to the Paleolithic, to a reverence for Earth's generative force as a great mother who endlessly gives birth, takes life, and regenerates it. The evidence he cites is the earliest human art: vulvas etched into stone, female figures emphasizing the sense of fecundity, obeisance. He calls integral to gynocentric and egalitarian social structures. The female principle running all through the Tao Te Ching, he argues, is that older world surviving inside a later one. Then he goes one step further and flags it as a wish rather than a fact. It is a joy to imagine, he writes, that the earliest of the sages woven into Lao Tzu, those responsible for the core regions of his thought, were in fact women. That is Hinton's argument, not settled history, but it changes how the book reads. Now the first line. You already know it, and you know it wrong. The famous English version runs, "The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao, elegant, mystical, slightly smug." Here is Hinton. A way called way isn't the perennial way. A name that names isn't the perennial name. The word eternal does not appear anywhere in his translation. Neither does Tao, as a rule. He renders it as way, with no article in front of it, because the moment you say the Tao, you have made it a thing, an object out there, something you could go and get. Way is not a thing. Way is what things are doing. And the opening line is not being coy about a secret. It is telling you, before anything else, that the instrument you are about to use is the wrong size for the job. The chapter keeps going, and it does something odd. It splits the world in two, and then refuses the split. The unnamed, it says, is origin of heaven and earth. The named is mother of the 10,000 things. In perennial absence, you see mystery, and in perennial presence, you see appearance. Two names, and then the turn. One and the same, they're called dark enigma. Dark enigma deep within dark enigma, gateway of all mystery. Dark enigma is Hinton's rendering of swan, and he keeps it hyphenated and lowercase all through the book, as if refusing to let it become a noun you could worship. So there are not two realms, a spiritual one and a material one. There is one fabric, seen twice, and the doorway is not somewhere else. It is the seam you are standing on. Which means it is time to hand you the vocabulary, because Hinton's words are not the words you have heard, and the difference is the whole reason to read his version. Tao is way. Te, usually translated as virtue, is integrity, and its root meaning, Hinton says, is heart-sight clarity. Wu is absence. You is presence. Not being and nothingness, he insists, but simply without form and within form. Wu Wei, the phrase the internet sells you as going with the flow, he refuses to fix. He renders it three ways on purpose: doing nothing, nothing doing, and nothing's own doing. Sujan becomes occurrence appearing of itself. And Tian Xia, which everyone else translates as the world, he keeps literal, all beneath heaven. Learn those six, and the book opens. Keep the familiar words, and you will read a different, softer book that was never written. So what is absence? Chapter 4 gives it a shape. Way is empty, and however much you use it, it never needs filling. It is a fathomless abyss that seems the ancestor of the 10,000 things, and then a line that would have been dangerous in any temple culture on earth. I don't know whose child it is. It precedes gods and creators. Not the greatest god, prior to gods. There is no one behind the curtain, because the curtain is what there is. And chapter 6 gives absence a body, and the body is female. The valley spirit never dies. It's called dark female enigma, and the gateway of dark female enigma is called the root of heaven and earth. A valley is nothing. A valley is the shape of what has been carved away, and the river runs there, and everything grows there. Try to look at it directly, and it refuses. Chapter 14. You look and cannot see it. Listen and cannot hear it. Reach and cannot touch it. Hinton calls it invisible, ethereal, gossamer. Then, this is called formless form, called nothing's image. Chapter 21 goes further and admits the difficulty out loud. Way is a thing so vague and so hazy, and yet, inside the haze, an image. Inside the shadow, a thing. Inside the murk, a seed. And inside the seed, the sincerity of facts. That last phrase is worth stopping on. This is not a book saying reality is an illusion. It is saying the most real thing has no edges, and a mind built for edges will keep coming back holding nothing. Which is why the book is written in poems and not arguments. It is not describing the fog. It is trying to put you in it. Chapter 25 is the one moment the book shows its hand, and it reads almost like a confession. There was something all murky shadow, born before heaven and earth. Silent, empty, standing alone and unchanging, moving everywhere and never at a loss. Then the writer admits he is stuck. I don't know its name. I'll call it Way, and if I must name it Vast. That is not the voice of revelation. That is somebody at the edge of language, choosing a placeholder and telling you it is a placeholder. Every religion you know names its ultimate with confidence. This book names it with a shrug and an apology, and then spends 80 more chapters using the name it just told you not to trust. The honesty is the argument. And having named it, the same chapter builds the only hierarchy this book allows, 4 rungs high. Human abides by earth, earth abides by heaven, heaven abides by way, way abides by occurrence appearing of itself. Follow that up, and you expect to arrive at a throne. Instead, the ladder runs out into a description of things simply happening the way they happen. There is nothing above the top. The top is that it goes. And the motion it goes in is a circle. Vast means it's passing beyond. Passing beyond means it's gone far away, and gone far away means it's come back. Whatever leaves is returning. That single sentence is the engine under the whole book, and every practical instruction that follows is a way of getting on the right side of it. Which brings us back to the wheel, and to the chapter that gives this book its spine. 30 spokes gathered at each hub. Absence makes the cart work. A storage jar fashioned out of clay. Absence makes the jar work. A room cut out with doors and windows. Absence makes the room work. 3 objects, 1 law. And then Lao Tzu states it flat in 8 words. Presence gives things their value, but absence makes them work. Look around whatever room you are in. Every useful thing in it is useful because of what is missing from it. The cup, the doorway, the page, the gap between the notes. We spend our lives adding. We measure ourselves by what we have accumulated, and the accumulation is the part that does nothing. Absence makes it work. Remember that phrase. It is going to keep coming back. If the wheel is the still version, chapter 5 is the moving one. Is all heaven and earth like a bellows chamber? It's empty, but never contracts. Just keeps bringing forth more and more. Picture the leather bellows on a forge. It has no contents. Its entire function is to be a cavity that opens and closes. It gives you a wind that could melt iron, and there is nothing inside it. That is the model of generation this book is built on. Not a maker filling a void with objects, a hollow that keeps producing because it stays hollow. And the chapter draws the practical conclusion in the next breath. So much talk of it, and the mind exhausted. Better to stay centered. The bellows does not explain itself. It just keeps breathing. Chapter 2 explains why you can never get one half of a pear. Everyone knows beauty is beauty, it says, and so ugliness is already there. Everyone knows good is good, and evil is already there. Being and absence give birth to one another. Difficult and easy complete one another. Long and short measure one another. Before and after follow one another. You cannot campaign for one end of a stick. Therefore, says the chapter, and it is the first therefore in the book, a sage abides in the realm of nothing's own doing, living out that wordless teaching. The sage does not withdraw from the world in disgust. The sage stops choosing sides in a fight that manufactures its own opponent and works in a way that does not generate the thing it is trying to remove. That is the first sight of the book's central practice, and it arrives as a consequence, not a commandment. Chapter 43 makes the same point physical, and it is the best sentence in the book for anyone who thinks this is passivity. The weakest in all beneath heaven gallops through the strongest, and vacant absence slips inside solid presence. Gallops, not seeps, not tolerates. Water going through granite at the speed of a horse. Nothing is more yielding than water, and nothing gets further into things. The gap gets everywhere the wall cannot. Rust is patient. Frost splits the boulder from inside. So when this book praises weakness, it is not praising defeat. It is naming the specific advantage of having no shape. You can enter everything. That, the chapter says, is how I know the value of nothing's own doing. And then, almost under its breath, the line that admits how badly this sells, the teaching without words. Few in all beneath heaven ever master it. Chapter 45 turns the same key on your own sense of being unfinished. Great perfection seems flawed, but its usefulness never fails. Great fullness seems empty, but its usefulness never ends. Great straightness seems bent. Great skill seems clumsy. Great eloquence seems tongue-tied. Read that as consolation, and you have misread it. It is a diagnostic. The finished thing is the dead thing. A wall with no gap has no door. A cup with no hollow is a lump of clay. What looks like a defect from the outside is very often the working part. And the chapter's ending is a whole philosophy of temperature. Bustling about conquers cold, but stillness conquers heat. Lucid tranquility brings all beneath heaven to right. You can outrun the cold. You cannot outrun the heat. For that, you have to stop. By chapter 40, the book has stopped illustrating and simply states its physics in 2 lines that would fit on a coin. Return is the movement of way, and yielding the method of way. Everything comes back. Everything gets there by giving way. And then the second couplet, which is the sentence the entire cosmology rests on. All beneath heaven, the 10,000 things, it's all born of presence, and presence is born of absence. Read it backwards, and you have the sequence. Absence, then presence, then the 10,000 things, then the return. A breath out and a breath in, at the scale of everything. 4 lines, no argument, no evidence, no defense. This book never argues. It states a shape, and then spends 80 chapters showing you where you are standing in it. Chapter 42 is the only place the book counts. Way gave birth to 1, and 1 gave birth to 2. 2 gave birth to 3, and 3 gave birth to the 10,000 things. The 10,000 things shouldered yin and embraced yang, blending qi to establish harmony. Note what just happened, because almost every piece of Tao Te Ching content on the internet gets this wrong. That is the only appearance of yin and yang in all 81 chapters. 1 line, the full yin-yang cosmology is a later systematization, and the black and white circular symbol everyone puts on the thumbnail is a Chinese diagram from around the 11th century of the Common Era, roughly 1500 years after this text. The Tao Te Ching does not have a symbol. It has a valley, a bellows, and a wheel. And the chapter ends where the book always ends up. What people despise, being orphaned and destitute, is what kings call themselves. Now the image everybody remembers, and it is worth hearing in Hinton's actual words. Lofty nobility is like water. Water's nobility is to enrich the 10,000 things and yet never strive. It just settles through places people everywhere loathe. Therefore, it's nearly way. 3 claims stacked in 4 lines. Water feeds everything. Water competes with nothing. Water goes down into the low places, the drains, the swamps, the ground under the floor, the places people arrange their lives to avoid. And it is that third one, not the first two, that earns the comparison. We are trained to read generosity as noble and ambition as noble, and to read downward as failure. This says the descent is the qualification. The reason water gets to everything is that it never argues about where it is going. It goes wherever is lowest, which is wherever it is needed. Chapter 22 turns that into 4 short lines that sound like riddles until you have lived a little. In yielding is completion, in bent is straight, in hollow is full, in exhaustion is renewal. Not yielding leads to completion, eventually, if you are patient. In yielding is completion. The thing you're waiting for is inside the thing you are avoiding. The bent tree is the one still standing after the storm. The empty bowl is the only one you can pour into. And exhaustion, real exhaustion, the end of the strategy you are running, is not the failure before renewal. It is the first minute of it. Then the chapter adds the sting. In having little, there's attainment, and in having much, there's confusion. Which is not a poem about simplicity. It is a warning about your options. And then it names the 4 things you have to put down, and they are all versions of the same thing. Don't show yourself off, and you'll shine forth. Don't insist you're right, and you'll be revealed. Don't brag, and you'll be honored. Don't be proud, and you'll be enduring. Self-display, self-justification, self-promotion, self-esteem. 4 ways of standing in front of what you are actually doing so that people can see you doing it. The chapter's claim is not moral, it is mechanical. Each of those moves produces exactly the outcome it is trying to prevent, because each of them announces the need. And then the last line, which is either the calmest or the most arrogant sentence in the book. It's said that in yielding is completion. These aren't empty words. When you're truly complete, you return home. Chapter 36 explains the mechanics of reversal, and it is the passage that has made rulers nervous for 2,000 years. To gather, you must scatter. To weaken, you must strengthen. To ruin, you must nurture. To take, you must give. This is called dusky enlightenment. You can read that as strategy, and plenty of people have. Every rising thing is being set up by its own rise. Every empire builds the roads its conquerors will use. But the chapter does not stop at cleverness. It lands on a hammer of a line, 5 words long, standing alone on the page. Soft and weak, overcome hard and strong. Not sometimes, not spiritually. As a rule of the world, alongside the observation that fish should be kept in their watery depths and a nation's honed instruments of power kept well hidden from the people. The soft thing wins. The book will prove it twice more before it ends. Chapter 66 takes the water logic and turns it into the clearest leadership instruction in the book. Oceans and rivers become emperors of the 100 valleys because they stay so perfectly below them. That's how they become emperors of the 100 valleys. The sea does not rule the rivers by being higher. It rules them by being the lowest thing there is, so everything arrives on its own. Then the application, and it is precise about sequence. If you want to rule over the people, you must speak from below them. If you want to lead the people, you must follow behind them. That's why a sage presides above without weighing the people down, and stands before without blocking their way. And the payoff line, which is what every organization on earth is still trying to buy, all beneath heaven delights in his praise, and never tires of it. Chapter 76 proves the soft overcomes hard claim with a fact you can check on any walk. People are soft and weak in life, hard and strong in death. The 10,000 plants and trees are soft and frail in life, withered and brittle in death. Bend a green branch and it comes back. Bend a dead one and it snaps. Rigidity is not the opposite of weakness. Rigidity is the last stage before the end. So it is that strong armies never overcome, and strong trees always suffer the axe. Read that twice, because it is the most counterintuitive line in the book and the most testable. The strong army is the visible one, the one worth destroying. The great straight tree is the one the woodcutter selects. The crooked one on the hillside, nobody wants lives 400 years. The strong and mighty dwell below, says the chapter. The soft and weak dwell above. And chapter 78 closes the case, going back to where it started. Nothing in all beneath heaven is so soft and weak as water. And yet, for conquering the hard and strong, nothing succeeds like water. Nothing can take its place. The canyon is the argument. A river with no muscle at all removed a mountain, one grain at a time. Over a span of time, no army has ever been given. The weak overcome the strong, and the soft overcome the hard. Everything throughout all beneath heaven knows this, and yet nothing puts it into practice. That last line is the whole human problem in 15 words, and the book is honest enough to say it out loud in the middle of instructing you. We know. We have always known. And when the moment arrives, we harden. Now the book turns inward, and the first thing it comes for is your appetite. The 5 colors blind eyes, the 5 tones deafen ears, the 5 tastes blur tongues. Fast horses and breathtaking hunts make minds wild and crazy, and things rare and expensive make abundance a crime. That was written for a Bronze Age court. Read it again against a phone. More colors than any human ate before. More sound. More flavor engineered past the point of flavor. More speed. And the claim is not that these are sins. The claim is that they are subtractive. Enough color and you stop seeing. Enough noise and you stop hearing. That's why a sage tends to the belly, not the eye. Puts that aside and takes up this. The belly knows when it is full. The eye has never once been full in the history of the species. Chapter 13 goes after something harder to put down than pleasure. Honor is a contamination, it says, and renown a great calamity. Not the loss of them, having them. Because favor and disgrace are the same coin. You get one by being the kind of person the other can happen to. Favor is the lesser, and to gain it is a calamity, and to lose it is a calamity. Then the chapter locates the injury with a precision that lands somewhere cold. We only know calamity because we have these selves. If we didn't have selves, what calamity could touch us? That is not a recommendation to have no personality. It is an observation about surface area. Everything you have built to be admired is a thing that can now be damaged, and you built it yourself, and you go on building. Honor those, says the ending, who tend all beneath heaven as they tend themselves. Chapter 7 makes the same move at cosmic scale, and then asks you a question you cannot unhear. Heaven is all-embracing, and earth is enduring. And why can heaven and earth be all-embracing and enduring? Because they never live for themselves. That's why they can live so long. Then it comes down to your level. A sage puts himself last, and so ends up first. Puts himself outside, and so ends up lasting. And then, the question. If you aren't free of yourself, how will you ever become yourself? 11 words that undo most of the self-improvement industry. Everything you are protecting is what you are stuck inside. The project of becoming someone is precisely what prevents it, because the project requires someone to be doing it, and that someone is the wall. Chapter 9 is the most practical thing in the book, and it is about knowing when to stop. Forever full of yourself, you're not as good as you might have been. Honed to a fine point, you won't last long. A house full of jade and gold cannot be defended. 3 images, and each is a physical fact. Overfill a cup, and you carry it badly. Grind a blade past the correct angle, and the edge chips on its first use. Fill a house with treasure, and you have not built wealth. You have built a target and hired guards to stand around it. Then the closing line, which is the least mystical sentence in the whole text and possibly the most useful. Do what you do, and then leave. Such is the way of heaven. Finish. Go. Do not stay to be thanked. Chapter 10 is the only place the book comes close to giving you a practice, and it does it entirely in questions. Can you let your spirit embrace primal unity without drifting away? Can you focus Shi'ai into such softness you're a newborn again? Can you polish the dark enigma mirror to a clarity beyond stain? Can you open and close heaven's gate without clinging to the female? Can you fathom Earth's 4 vast reaches without depending on knowledge? A mirror in the ancient world was polished bronze. It shows you everything and holds nothing. That is the image for a mind here, not empty of content, but not staining. And the newborn is not a metaphor for innocence. Chapter 55 is explicit about why. An infant's bones are supple, its grip is tight, and it can wail all day without going hoarse. It is soft, and it is inexhaustible, and it has never once tried. And that chapter ends on a line that Lao Tzu thought was important enough to repeat word for word 41 chapters later. Give birth without possessing, foster without dominating. This is called dark enigma integrity, which is a sentence about raising a child, and about running a team, and about making anything at all. You made it. It is not yours. You feed it, and you do not steer it. The moment you claim the outcome, you have started subtracting from it, because a thing that exists to prove you were right has stopped being able to become anything you did not predict. Hinton's word, integrity, is carrying real weight here. Not virtue, not righteousness. Integrity as in integral, whole, unbroken. The thing has not been split off from what it came from. This is the closest the book gets to describing love, and it does it by describing a hand letting go. If you want to know what this looks like in a person, chapter 15 paints 7 portraits in a row. The ancients, it says, were so subtle and mysterious you could never fathom them. So then, watch how they were. Perfectly cautious, as if crossing winter streams. Perfectly watchful, as if neighbors threatened. Perfectly reserved, as if guests. Perfectly expansive, as if ice melting away. Perfectly simple, as if uncarved wood. Perfectly empty, as if open valleys. Crossing winter streams. You have done that walk on ice you were not sure about, and you know exactly the quality of attention it produces. Nothing hurried, nothing tense, everything awake. That is the whole instruction, not solemnity. That specific gait. And uncarved wood, Pu, is the book's signature image, not the uncarved block you may have read elsewhere. Wood, still a tree's worth of possibility before anyone decided what it was for. The same chapter asks the 2 questions that are the actual test. Who's murky enough to settle slowly into pure clarity, and who's still enough to awaken slowly into life? Murky enough, not clear enough. Because you cannot filter a stirred-up glass of water, you cannot squeeze the silt out. There is exactly one way that water becomes clear, and it is to be left alone, and it takes as long as it takes, and any intervention restarts the clock. The word this book keeps using is slowly, and slowly is the part we cannot do. We are willing to be transformed. We are not willing to sit in the murk while it happens. And the chapter closes on the reason this is bearable. Those who abide in this way never long for fullness. Never longing for fullness, there go on and on, never needing to be renewed. Chapter 16 is the closest thing to a meditation instruction the book contains, and it comes with a ladder attached. Inhabit the furthest peripheries of emptiness, and abide in the tranquil center. There the 10,000 things arise, and in them I watch the return. Everything on and ever on, each returning to its root. Returning to the root is called tranquility, and tranquility is called returning to destiny. Then it climbs. Knowing constancy is enlightenment. Not knowing constancy, you stumble into calamity. Knowing constancy, you're all-embracing. All-embracing, you're impartial. Impartial, you're the emperor. Emperor, you're heaven. Heaven, your way. Way, you're enduring. And the last rung is not a coronation. It is this. Self gone, you never suffer danger. The ladder goes all the way up to emperor and heaven and way. And the top of it is that you are not there. And then, for one page, the book stops teaching and someone speaks. Chapter 20 is the strangest thing in the text. because it is the only place with a person in it, and that person is miserable. People all radiate such joy, happily offering a sacrificial ox or climbing a tower in spring. But I go nowhere and reveal nothing. Like a newborn child who has yet to smile. Forlorn drifter, I have nowhere to return. People all have enough and more. I alone am destitute, and my mind is so foolish, is so utterly simple-minded. I am dull and confused. I am inept, thoroughly useless and backward. Every other chapter tells you the sage is at ease. This one tells you what it actually costs to see differently from everyone around you, in a voice that sounds exactly like loneliness. And then the last line, I'll never be like other people. I keep to the nurturing mother. Chapter 33 is 4 lines that most people have met in a mangled form, so here are the real ones. To know people is wisdom, but to know yourself is enlightenment. To master people takes force, but to master yourself takes strength. You may have seen that as mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. That is a different translator's version, and it is beautiful, and it is not what is on this page. Hinton's version is plainer and harder. Force is what you use on other people. Strength is what it takes to turn around. Then the chapter widens. To know contentment is wealth, and to die without getting lost, that is to live on and on. Wealth is not a number here. Wealth is the point at which the number stops mattering, and the book's flat claim is that most people never reach it at any number. Chapter 41 is the book laughing at itself, and it is the most charming 20 seconds in the text. When the lofty hear of way, they devote themselves. When the common hear of way, they wonder if it's real or not. And when the lowly hear of way, they laugh out loud. Then the turn, and it is a good one. Without that laughter, it wouldn't be way. A teaching that everyone found reasonable would not be describing anything you did not already believe. The mockery is not a problem to be managed. It is a reading on the instrument. And the chapter follows it with a run of paradoxes that sound like sayings because they are, the bright way seems dark. The way ahead seems to go back. The great square has no corners. The great voice sounds faint, and the great image has no shape. Way hides in namelessness, it ends, and only way nourishes and perfects. And chapter 70 is that same complaint from the inside, and it is the only place the book sounds hurt. My words are so simple to understand and so easily put into practice that no one in all beneath heaven understands them, and no one puts them into practice. There is nothing esoteric here, and that is the entire grievance. The teaching is not hidden, not encrypted, and it asks for no initiation. It is a handful of plain observations about how things behave, and the difficulty has never once been comprehension. Then it names the reason, and it flatters nobody. And the less people understand me, the more precious I become. Being misunderstood makes you valuable. Being understood would have made you useful. So it is that a sage wears sackcloth, keeping pure jade harbored deep. Rough cloth on the outside, and nothing on the outside to tell you otherwise, which is exactly why the lowly laughed. Chapter 56 opens with the line the whole book gets summarized as, and the summary is not wrong. Those who know don't talk, and those who talk don't know. Then, rather than leaving it as an epigram, it tells you what the knowing ones are actually doing. Block the senses and close the mind. Blunt edges, loosen tangles, soften glare, mingle dust. 4 movements, and none of them is retreat. Blunt your edges so you stop cutting people who come close. Loosen your tangles, the knots you have tied yourself into. Soften your glare, stop being the brightest thing in the room, and mingle dust. Get down into the ordinary and be indistinguishable in it. This is called dark enigma union. And its result is a person you cannot get hold of. You can't get close and you can't get distant. Can't profit them and can't harm them. Can't ennoble and can't debase. Chapter 71 is 9 words long, and it is an entire epistemology. Knowing not knowing is lofty. Not knowing is affliction. There is not knowing something, which is ordinary, and there is not knowing that you do not know it, which is the condition almost everyone is in about almost everything, and which the book calls a sickness. Chapter 47 pushes this into territory that will make a modern viewer bristle, and it should. You can know all beneath heaven, it claims, without ever stepping out the door. You can see the way of heaven without ever looking out the window. The further you explore, the less you know. Taken as advice about geography or science, that is simply false, and it is worth saying so. Taken as a claim about a specific kind of knowledge, the kind that no amount of additional information has ever once produced in anybody, it is uncomfortably accurate. Chapter 48 states the difference between the two projects in 2 lines, and they should be printed opposite each other. To work at learning brings more each day. To work at way brings less each day. Less, and still less, until you're nothing's own doing. That is the phrase Hinton refuses to smooth into non-action, and this is why. Wu-wei is not idleness, and it is not flow. It is the endpoint of a subtraction. You remove the parts of yourself that were being deliberate about it, and what continues after that is not you doing nothing. It is the thing doing itself through you, with nobody left in the way. And when you're nothing's own doing, there's nothing you don't do. Then the political version, 7 words, and it has terrified administrators for 2.5 millennia. To grasp all beneath heaven, leave it alone. Chapter 27 gives that endpoint 5 images, and they are the most beautiful lines in the book. Perfect travels leave no tracks. Perfect words leave no doubts. Perfect codes leave no calculations. Perfect gates close without locks, and so cannot be opened. Perfect knots bind without rope, and so cannot be loosened. Read the last 2 again. A gate that has no lock cannot be picked. A knot with no rope cannot be untied, because there is nothing there to work on. That is what mastery looks like in this book. Not force applied more skillfully, the apparatus gone entirely, and the function remaining. And the chapter ends on a hinge that quietly rules out contempt. A sage is always the master of caring, so nothing's ever abandoned. Nothing is ever abandoned, and no one. The one who is skilled is the teacher, and the one who is not is the resource. Chapter 44 asks 3 questions that take about 2 seconds each and about a decade to answer honestly. Name or self, which is precious? Self or wealth, which is treasure? Gain or loss, which is affliction? Then it does the arithmetic for you in a line that sounds gentle and is not. Indulge in love, and the cost is dear. Keep hoarding, and the loss is heavy. And Chapter 46 supplies the diagnosis behind all of it. What calamity is greater than no contentment, it asks. What flaw is greater than an appetite for gain? The contentment of fathoming contentment, it says. There lies the contentment that endures. Not contentment with circumstances, contentment with contentment. Being satisfied by the state of being satisfied, rather than treating it as the boring interval between 2 acquisitions. Knowing contentment you avoid tarnish, ends Chapter 44, and knowing when to stop you, avoid danger. And then a passage that reads as if it were written last week about the optimization industry. Chapter 55. To enhance your life is called tempting fate, and to control he with the mind is called violence. Violence. Not error, not vanity. Violence, done to yourself, by your own mind, in the act of managing your own vitality. The chapter's reasoning follows immediately, and it is the same physics as the green branch. Things grown strong soon grow old. This is called Way's opposite, and Way's opposite is soon gone. The peak is not a destination. The peak is the moment decline becomes structurally guaranteed, and everything you did to reach the peak faster brought that moment closer. Lose the way, says the line at the end, and you die young. That is not a threat about the afterlife. It is a claim about what forcing does to a living system, and every gardener already knows it is true. Chapter 28 gives the book's home image its fullest statement, and it does it 3 times. Know the masculine, nurture the feminine, and you become the river of all beneath heaven. Know white, nurture black, and you become the pattern of all beneath heaven. Know splendor, nurture ruin, and you become the valley of all beneath heaven. Know the bright thing, feed the dark one, and each time, the payoff is the same. You rest content in perennial integrity, and so return to the simplicity of uncarved wood. Uncarved wood, not yet a chair, not yet a spoon, not yet a spear. Then the political sting, and it is the sharpest sentence in this half of the book. When uncarved wood is split apart, it becomes mere implements. But when a sage is employed, he becomes the ruling elder, for the great governing blade carves nothing. The blade that governs best is the one that does not cut. Chapter 54 is the hinge between everything you have just heard and everything that follows, because it is where this stops being private. Something planted so deep, it's never rooted up. It begins. Something held so tight, it's never stolen away. Then it widens, one ring at a time. Cultivated in yourself, it makes integrity real. Cultivated in your family, it makes integrity plentiful. Cultivated in your village, it makes integrity enduring. Cultivated in your nation, it makes integrity abundant. Cultivated in all beneath heaven, it makes integrity all-encompassing. And then the method for seeing it, which is the strangest instruction in the book. So look through self into self, through family into family, through village into village, through nation into nation, through all beneath heaven into all beneath heaven. Not down at it, through it. You do not assess a village by standing outside it holding a measure. You find the village's own terms, and you look along them. Which brings us to politics, and to the 4-line passage every book on leadership has been reheating ever since. The loftiest ruler is barely known among those below. Next comes a ruler people love and praise. After that, one they fear, and then one they despise. Look at the order. Being loved is second place. The leader everybody adores is one rung down from the one nobody notices, because adoration means the people can feel a hand on them, and a hand is a hand whether it is kind or not. Then the payoff, and the whole theory of government in this book. When the 100-fold people see your work succeed in all they do, they'll say it's just occurrence appearing of itself. The best possible outcome is that they think it happened by itself. There is no credit. That is not the leader's sacrifice. That is the job being done. Chapter 29 explains why, and it uses a word that stops the argument. All beneath heaven is a sacred vessel, something beyond all improvement. Try to improve it, and you ruin it. Try to hold it, and you lose it. Sacred, in the sense of already whole. Not perfect, not fair, not comfortable. Complete in a way that does not have a handle on it. The chapter then lists the reason no single policy can be right. Among all things, some lead and some follow. Some sigh and some sing. Some are strong and some are frail. Some flourish and some fail. Any rule you write covers half of them and lands on the other half like a boot. That's why a sage steers clear of extremes, steers clear of extravagance, steers clear of exaltation. Not moderation as a personality. Moderation as the only honest response to a system you cannot see all of. Chapter 37 puts the paradox in its final form and closes the first half of the book with it. Wei is perennially doing nothing, so there's nothing it doesn't do. That is not a riddle for its own sake. It is a description of every generative system you have ever seen. Nobody is operating the forest. There is no one at the controls of the reef. There is no deliberation anywhere in the process, and the output is everything. Then the chapter tells the ruler what to do with that, and admits the difficulty. If leaders abide by this, the 10,000 things will change of themselves. But if they change and desire stirs, use uncarved, nameless simplicity to still it. And the last line of the Tao Te Ching, the first of the 2 books. Tranquil and free of desire, all beneath heaven at rest of itself. Chapter 57 takes that from theory to a data point, and the data point is uncomfortable. The more prohibitions and taboos in all beneath heaven, the poorer the people. The more clever contraptions people have, the more chaotic the nation. The more knowledge and skill they have, the more elaborate things become. Then the line that has never stopped being observably true. The faster laws and decrees are issued, the more bandits and thieves appear. Every prohibition creates the crime it names. Every enforcement produces an economy of evasion. This is not a case against order. It is the observation that a rule and its violation arrive together, exactly as beauty arrived with ugliness in chapter 2. Therefore a sage says, I do nothing, and the people transform themselves. I cherish tranquility, and the people rectify themselves. I do not meddle, and the people prosper themselves. And then, in a book with almost no jokes, the best line in it. Govern a great nation as you would cook a small fish. That is the entire chapter's thesis, and Hinton's own note tells you exactly how to read it, as if it were an insignificant matter and with the least handling possible. Anyone who has ruined a small fish knows this in their hands. You put it in the pan. If you poke it, if you turn it to check, if you keep testing whether it is done, it comes apart, and there is no recovering it. The only technique is restraint that looks like inattention and is not. That is a whole theory of management delivered as a cooking tip, and it survives translation into every language and every century because the pan has not changed. Most intervention is checking. Most checking is damage. Now, the most quoted line in the book, and the most misused sentence in the wisdom industry. Chapter 64. For a tree you can barely reach around grows from the tiniest rootlet. A 9-tiered tower starts as a basket of dirt, and a 1,000-mile journey begins with a single step. You have seen that on a poster sold as Hustle, Day 1, No Excuses. Now read what comes 5 lines later in the same chapter. Work at things, and you ruin them. Cling to things, and you lose them. That's why a sage does nothing, and so ruins nothing, holds on to nothing, and so loses nothing. And then, when people devote themselves to something, they always ruin it on the verge of success. The chapter is not a motivational poster. It is a warning against what the poster sells. The single step is not about starting hard. It is about how small the real leverage is and how early. And when the book gets angry, it gets specific. Chapter 53. Courts are wonderfully adorned, and the fields overgrown, and the granaries bare. Some wear elegant robes, carry sharp swords, and gorge themselves with food and drink. They possess wealth in gross abundance. Then the verdict, and it is not philosophical at all. It's vainglorious thievery, not the way at all. Thievery, not inequity, not imbalance, theft, done by people wearing the robes of the state. Chapter 75 puts it in the second person and takes the last of the padding out. The people are starving, and it's only because you leaders feast on taxes that they're starving. That is a book about emptiness and valleys and uncarved wood, stopping mid-thought to point at somebody in a room and say, "It is you, and we can see you." And chapter 77 gives the alternative with the most elegant image in the political half of the book. Is the way of heaven like a drawn bow? The high it pushes down, the low it lifts up. It takes away where there's abundance and restores where there's want. Anyone who has drawn a bow knows the shape. You press one end down and pull the other up. The bow is in tension because it is equalizing. Then the turn, delivered without cushioning. But the way of humankind isn't like that. It takes away where there's want and gives where there's abundance. 2 systems in 6 lines. One redistributes by its nature. The other concentrates by its nature. This was written 25 centuries ago, and it is still the exact sentence you would use. Who can offer abundance to all beneath heaven, it asks. Only those who abide in way. Now the part most channels leave out, and leaving it out is dishonest. So here it is. Chapter 3 says, "Fill bellies and empty minds, strengthen bones and weaken ambition. Always keep the people from knowing and wanting." And Chapter 65 says, "The ancient masters of way never enlightened people. They kept people simple-minded, because people are difficult to rule when they know too much." Read plainly. That is an argument for keeping a population ignorant, and no amount of incense makes it not say that. Hinton's reading is ontological rather than political. The ruler is meant to be absence, the empty field, and the people are presence burgeoning out of it. So knowing here means the calculating, scheming knowledge Chapter 47 attacked. That is a real defense. It is also true that authoritarians have quoted these chapters approvingly for 2,000 years, and you should know both before you decide. Which makes it worth putting the counterweight beside it, because the same book contains this. Chapter 62. Way is the mystery of the 10,000 things, treasure of the noble and refuge of the ignoble. It never abandons even the evil among us. Chapter 49. A sage has no fixed mind of his own. He makes the mind of the hundredfold people his mind. And then, remarkably, to the noble, I am noble, and to the ignoble, I am noble also. That is the integrity of nobility. To the sincere, I am sincere, and to the insincere, I am sincere also. You do not get to grade people first and then decide how to treat them. In Chapter 72, which is the shortest political instruction in the book and the one most governments have never once followed. Don't hem them in and choke their lives with oppression. That's all. Just let them be. Chapter 58 paints the portrait of a person who has actually absorbed all this, and it does it in 4 negatives. That's why a sage is sharp but never cuts, austere but never grates, forthright but never provokes, bright but never dazzles. Every one of those is a quality with its damage removed: sharpness that does not wound, rigor that does not abrade, directness that does not put people on the defensive, brilliance that does not make anybody feel small. Not softened. Sharp is still sharp. The edge is intact, and it is simply not being used on you. And the same chapter is honest about how ambiguous the world it is describing actually is. Fortune is where misfortune hides, and misfortune where fortune nests. Who knows where it all ends, for nothing is definitive. Chapter 73, Answers. In the book's largest image, the net of heaven is vast, woven so vast and wide open, nothing slips through. Now the war chapters, and they are the moral center of the book. Chapter 30 starts with consequence, not principle. Wherever armies camp, thorn and bramble grow. Vast armies on the march leave years of misery behind. That is a farmer's observation. The field where the soldiers were does not recover for a generation, and everyone alive then knew it. And everyone alive now has seen the satellite pictures. Then the discipline of the reluctant victory. 4 lines that grow more severe as they go. Prevail, but never presume. Prevail, but never boast. Prevail, but never exult. Prevail, but never when there's another way. The first 3 are about your face after you have won. The 4th is about whether you should have been there at all, and it is placed last so it lands hardest. Prevail, and never rely on force, ends the chapter. Things grown strong soon grow old. And Chapter 31 is the passage that ought to be more famous than any of them. Weapons are the tools of misfortune, not of a noble one. He uses them only when he has no choice. Then the sentence that separates this book from every other ancient text about war. To find glory in victory is to savor killing people. And if you savor killing people, you'll never guide all beneath heaven. And then the instruction for what to do after you have won. When so many people are being killed, it should be done with tears and mourning, and victory too should be conducted like a funeral. Not a parade, a funeral, with the ranks arranged the way mourners are arranged. There is no version of this that congratulates anybody. Even the necessary war ends with the winners in the posture of the bereaved, because something was destroyed and pretending otherwise is the beginning of the next one. Chapter 67 is the only place the book gives you a numbered list, and it is worth memorizing. There are 3 treasures I hold and nurture. The first is called compassion, the second economy, and the third, never daring to lead all beneath heaven. Compassion, and it does not mean sentiment here, because 2 lines later it is described as a weapon. Economy, meaning frugality, restraint, not spending what you do not need to spend, of money, and of force, and of words. And third, the strangest one, never daring to put yourself at the front. Then the reasoning, all 3 in a row. With compassion, you can be truly brave. With economy, you can be truly generous. And by never daring to lead all beneath heaven, you can give your self-perfection to the perfection of all. Bravery comes from caring, not from courage. Generosity comes from restraint, not from abundance. And leadership comes from refusing to lead. And then Lao Tzu looks at his own century and delivers the most contemporary sentence in the book. But these days, it's all courage without compassion, generosity without economy, and leading without following. 3 treasures, each one severed from its root and kept for its own sake. Courage without compassion is just aggression that has learned to describe itself well. Generosity without economy is spending you cannot sustain, performed for an audience. And leading without following is a person out in front who has stopped checking whether anyone is behind them. Then, flatly, with no elaboration, there's nothing but death in that. And the chapter recovers with the line that turns the first treasure from a feeling into a strategy. To overcome, attack with compassion. To stand firm, defend with compassion. That's how heaven forges you, keeping compassion as your guard. Chapters 68 and 69 finish the argument by describing the person who is actually good at this. A noble official is never warlike. A noble warrior is never angered. A noble conqueror never engages the enemy. A noble leader is humble in action, never angered. The best fighter in this book is defined by the emotion he does not have, because anger is a lever anyone can reach. Then chapter 69 quotes an old maxim, which is the closest the poem ever comes to reported speech. There was once a saying among those who wielded armies, "I'd much rather be a guest than a host, much rather retreat a foot than advance an inch." And it ends with a claim you would not expect a book this unsentimental to make. When armies face one another in battle, it's always the tender-hearted one that prevails. Nothing is a worse calamity, says the same chapter, than thinking you have no enemy. Chapter 74 takes the argument to the state's ultimate power and refuses it. If people no longer fear death, how can you threaten them with death? Because the miserable have nothing left to lose, and a threat only works on someone with something remaining. Then it names the force that does the killing in this cosmology, and the name is chilling, the executioner. The executioner's killing is perennial. It goes on without us, and it does not consult us. And the warning to any human who steps into that role. To kill in the executioner's place is like trying to carve lumber for a master carpenter. Try to carve lumber for a master carpenter, and you'll soon have blood on your hands. An amateur takes the master's chisel, and the first thing that happens is an injury to himself. This is a book written during a civil war, arguing against capital punishment in the voice of a carpenter's apprentice. Now the polemic, because this book has an opponent and his name is Confucius. Chapter 18. When the great way is abandoned, we're faced with humanity and duty. When clever wisdom appears, we're faced with great fraud. When familial harmony ends, we're faced with obedience and kindness. When chaos engulfs the nation, we're faced with trustworthy ministers. Humanity and duty are the pillars of Confucian ethics, and Lao Tzu is not calling them false, he is calling them symptoms. Chapter 38 builds it into a staircase going down, one step per line. Lose way, and integrity appears. Lose integrity, and humanity appears. Lose humanity, and duty appears. Lose duty, and ritual appears. And ritual, the bottom step, gets the book's most physical piece of contempt. When there's no response, ritual rolls up its sleeves and forces them into line. Rules with their sleeves rolled up. That is what is left when the thing itself is gone. Chapter 38 opens with the paradox that gives the entire second half of the book its name. High integrity never has integrity, and so is indeed integrity. Low integrity never loses integrity, and so is not integrity at all. The person of real integrity is not tracking their integrity. The moment it becomes a possession you monitor, an inventory you check, it is turned into performance, and the performance is what low integrity means here. And Chapter 19 states the program that follows, in a form so blunt it has embarrassed commentators for 2,000 years. Give up sagehood, abandon wisdom, and people will profit 100-fold. Give up humanity and abandon duty, and people will return to obedience and kindness. Then, unusually, it takes half of it back. These 3 sayings, it admits, are mere refinements, nowhere near enough. So give people something to rely on. Observe origins weave, embrace uncarved simplicity, self nearly forgotten, desires rare. And now the passage that ends the wellness reading of this book for good. Chapter 5. 5 words in. Heaven and earth are inhumane. They use the 10,000 things like straw dogs. Straw dogs, as Hinton's note explains, were effigies made for a sacrifice and thrown away the moment the ritual was over. Made with care, used exactly once, discarded without a thought. And the second line does not spare you. A sage is inhumane. He uses the 100-fold people like straw dogs. There is no benevolent universe in this book. Wei is not looking after you. Hinton says it directly in his introduction. Wei is indifferent and inhumane. Even the executioner and the so-called harmony of natural process includes a great deal of waste and destruction. The forest that is so beautiful in your calendar photograph is also a mass grave, continuously, and the same process is responsible for both, and it is not deciding. Which sets up Hinton's most surprising move, because he is the translator, and translators do not usually do this. He argues that the book fails on its own terms. However accurate and appealing his idealistic vision may be, Hinton writes, it had little to offer as a practical prescription, for the simple reason that it fundamentally contradicts the principle of Wei. Follow the logic. If Wei is indifferent, if waste and destruction are part of the process, if all beneath heaven is a sacred vessel beyond improvement, then cruelty and injustice are also a occurrence appearing of itself. To demand they stop is to demand that things stop being what they are. Lao Tzu's prescription for solving social injustice, Hinton says, was itself a colossal system of unnatural desire, a hopeless attempt to change the makeup of not only the human world, but of Wei itself. The compassion in this book breaks its own cosmology, and Hinton thinks Lao Tzu knew. So what is the book, if it is not a program? Hinton's answer is the sentence this entire video has been walking toward. In the end, his is not so much a practical political philosophy as a political poetry, a lament that only grows more and more poignant as stratified societies continue to thrive on social injustice. A lament, not a manual, not a technique, a grief that could not stop itself from prescribing. And Hinton shows how Chinese civilization solved the split. Chuang-Tzu was the more consistent Taoist and made no attempt at social justice. Confucianism supplied the workable social system. Taoism kept the private, spiritual realm, and the two ran side by side for 2,000 years in one educated mind. Which is why Hinton can write, with no hedging. It goes without saying that Lao Tzu's critique represents a fundamental critique of modern capitalism, thriving as it does on fabricating desire. But there is a consolation underneath the lament, and it is the deepest thing in Hinton's introduction. Self, he writes, is but a fleeting form taken on by Earth's process of change, born out of it and returned to it in death. Or more precisely, never out of it, totally unborn. Never out of it, totally unborn. You are not manufactured and inserted into the world. You are a shape the world is currently making. The way a wave is a shape, water is currently making, and the wave does not have a problem to solve about the ocean. That is what the ladder in chapter 16 was climbing toward when its top rung read, "Self gone, you never suffer danger." Not annihilation. The recognition that the thing you were defending was a temporary local arrangement of something that was never in danger. For 2 millennia, Hinton says, this was the Chinese educated class's consolation in the face of death. And in chapter 80, the book stops arguing and just describes what it wants, and it is the only fully rendered scene in the text. Let there be a little country with a small population, where things work 10 or 100 times better than necessary and simply go unused. Then, though they have boats and carriages, no one will bother to climb aboard. Though they have armor and weapons, no one will bother to drill with them. Let people knot ropes for notation again, and never need anything more. Let them find their food savory, their clothes beautiful, their homes comfortable, their ways of living delightful. And then the last image, which is either the most peaceful thing you have ever heard or the loneliest. Then people in neighboring nations will look across to each other, their chickens and dogs calling back and forth, and yet they'll grow old and die without bothering to exchange visits. And so we arrive at chapter 81, the last one, and it opens by disqualifying itself. Sincere words are never beautiful, and beautiful words never sincere. The noble are never eloquent, and the eloquent never noble. The knowing are never learned, and the learned never knowing. That is a poet writing the most beautiful book in his language and telling you, in its final lines, not to trust beautiful books. Then, having spent 80 chapters on what to stop doing, it says what to do, and it is the only unambiguously generous instruction in the text. A sage never hoards. The more you do for others, the more plenty is yours, and the more you give to others, the more abundance is yours. Not because giving is virtuous, because a thing that flows keeps arriving, a thing that is stored has already stopped, and the wheel only turns on the space in the middle. And the book's very last line, which is both halves of everything you have just heard. The way of heaven is to profit without causing harm, and the way of a sage to act without contending. Then Hinton takes us back to the pass, the old man on the ox going west out of a country he could not save. Hinton's ending puts it like this, overwhelmed by the intractable grief people were enduring, and yet smiling at a butterfly. Grieving and smiling at the same time in the same face. That is the book. Lao Tzu vanished back into that mysterious transformation of things, Hinton writes, and the voice that remains is the voice of that mystery herself, the voice of dragon, voice of earth. Which leaves you with the wheel. 30 spokes, 1 hub, and the hole in the middle. Everything you own is the spokes. Absence makes it work.